Understanding behavior is key to bridging divides. The MAGA mentality refers to the attitudes, beliefs, and worldview associated with the Make America Great Again slogan, which became prominent through Donald Trump's 2016 presidential campaign. This movement has persisted to the present day and has torn the Republican Party to shreds. Old-school Republicans are slowly disappearing, and a new generation is born that is controllable and obedient. The MAGA mentality varies among individuals, but some common themes include patriotism and nationalism. MAGA supporters tend to have a strong pride in America's history, culture, and values. They put an emphasis on restoring what is perceived as America's former greatness or prosperity. Focus on America First policies. Supporters prioritize domestic concerns over international ones, such as manufacturing jobs, border security, and energy independence. Skepticism toward globalization, international agreements, and foreign aid travel like waves among them. Distrust of government institutions. There is also a strong criticism of what is perceived as the deep state or entrenched bureaucratic power. Advocacy for smaller government and reduced regulations weigh on their minds. Anti-establishment and anti-elite sentiment. MAGA supporters have an opposition to traditional political elites, mainstream media, and perceived corruption in Washington, as well as supporting outsiders or non-career politicians. Cultural conservatism. Supporters tend to emphasize traditional family values, religion, and what are considered the foundational principles of the U.S. Constitution. Opposition to progressive social changes, such as those involving gender, race, or immigration policy, tend to be large battles among the party lines. Economic populism. Advocacy for policies that prioritize American workers and industries, such as tariffs, tax cuts, or renegotiating trade deals. Last, but certainly not least, polarized view of opponents. MAGA supporters frame political opposition as harmful to American values or identity. The use of rhetoric about draining the swamp or combating socialism, Marxism, the enemy within, which tend to be rivals of MAGA. There are two views, two perceptions and criticisms. Though the Democratic Party and supporters have a relatively negative view on what MAGA stands for, the MAGA mentality is seen positively by its adherents as a movement to revive American greatness and challenge entrenched systems. However, critics argue it can foster divisiveness, undermine democratic norms, and be exclusionary or nationalistic to a fault. Like any movement, the MAGA mentality represents a spectrum of beliefs shaped by individual perspectives and experiences. Linking ODD and MAGA. Now, this is a specific feeling that people have. They are hurt, lost, and need something to believe in. The idea is based on the fault of the institution. It's derived from a belief that people outside of Capitol Hill know better than those who are career politicians. A belief that separation of church and state no longer suit their ideals. There is a pattern with most MAGA supporters, and it isn't new, unseen, or undocumented. It is a strong defiance to the political system and political normalities. I want to be very clear, this is not a completely negative mentality. It is part of what makes this country great and allows us to have much needed discourse. The problem arrives when the MAGA movement is completely intolerable of anything outside of their own beliefs. This creates massive tension and an unwillingness to meet in the middle and find common ground. This is very much like ODD, or Oppositional Defiant Disorder. Oppositional Defiant Disorder, ODD, is typically diagnosed in children, but for some individuals, the symptoms don't just fade away with age. In adults, ODD can be harder to recognize because it often manifests in more subtle, less obvious ways. But the core behaviors, arguing, defiance, and hostility, are still present. ODD in adults is a pattern of ongoing, persistent negative and defiant behavior toward authority figures like managers, coworkers, partners, or anyone in a position of control. But just like with kids, it's more than just being rebellious or occasionally disagreeing with someone. It's a consistent, disruptive pattern. So, what does ODD look like in adults? Chronic irritability, frequently angry, annoyed, or argumentative over small things. Frequent arguments with authority figures. Whether it's a boss, teacher, or even a partner, arguing is a common pattern. Refusal to accept responsibility. Always blaming others for mistakes or failures. Defying rules or regulations. Constantly challenging rules at work or in social settings, sometimes just for the sake of defiance. Difficulty in relationships. Tension with family members, partners, or friends due to consistent challenging behaviors. Spiteful behaviors. Engaging in actions meant to get back at others, even if the response is disproportionate to the issue. Now, ODD in adults can often overlap with other mental health conditions like ADHD, personality disorders, or anxiety. So, it can be tricky to diagnose. But if you've been struggling with persistent feelings of frustration, anger, and resistance to authority, especially if it's affecting your work and personal life, it might be time to take a closer look. Socially, adults with ODD might struggle to maintain healthy relationships with friends or partners. Arguments can spiral out of control, and behaviors like blaming others or being spiteful can make it hard for others to connect or trust them. This often leads to isolation or misunderstandings. Now, if we take the idea of ODD and translate it, we can see very clear indicators within the MAGA movement and specifically with Trump himself. Chronic irritability. Many MAGA supporters are angry and irritable. They are continuously argumentative and annoyed. There is a perception that anything other than MAGA is wrong and part of the institution. This correlates with the way Trump views politics. Next is anti-institution and anti-elite sentiment. The whole totality of MAGA is to fight the institution and the elites who run it. There is this idea that anyone who is currently a career politician is the enemy and should be replaced. Trump has plans for his new presidency to do just this. They have an anti-elite sentiment and often distrust political elites, career politicians, and perceived insiders in Washington. What they fail to see is that they are in fact supporting an elite. Trump is very rich. His net worth is $8 billion at the time of writing this. Donald Trump only does things to further his own goals, or the goals of all the billionaires pulling the strings. Currently, it appears his goal is to destroy the government and replace all positions of power with people who are loyalists and will do whatever Trump wants, cut taxes for the richest people in America while further padding his pockets for a second term. Trump surrounds himself with elites like the richest man in the world, Elon Musk, tech billionaire Peter Thiel, hedge fund billionaire Robert Mercer, CEO of global investment firm BlackRock, worth $40 billion, Stephen Schwarzman, hedge fund manager worth $46.5 billion, Ken Griffin, and many, many more elites. There is a refusal to accept responsibility. MAGA, and specifically Trump, refuse to accept responsibility for anything he does. Trump has been found guilty on many counts of fraud, guilty of assault, refuses to take responsibility for January 6th, for the failure in controlling the COVID-19 pandemic and failed response, for the responsibility of the U.S. to limit climate change, blaming China for increased prices due to his tariff policies, responsibility for the turnover of his administration, countless defaming statements and behaviors, refusing to acknowledge his role in exacerbating racial tensions during protests, blaming protesters, the media, and Democratic leaders, often labeling media coverage of his statements as fake news rather than addressing the impact of his words. And the MAGA party eats it up and regurgitates the rhetoric on all platforms. Now, it's not accurate to say that MAGA supporters have ODD, but the parallels in group behavior are interesting. Political movements often channel collective frustration into oppositional actions, which can appear similar to defiance on an individual level. So, what does this mean? Movements like MAGA are both a reaction and rallying cry, giving a voice to those who feel unheard or disenfranchised. However, when oppositional behavior dominates, it risks becoming counterproductive, alienating broader coalitions, and escalating societal division. In order to realize what the division is, we need to clearly understand why the division exists to begin with. Is this just the product of a two-party system? We have so many beliefs amongst each other, and we can't seem to sort them out like adults. It's a parallel that can be seen throughout world history, and each time it took the will of the world to unite for our safety, prosperity, and overall good of mankind. So I ask you right now, who do you know that is a Trump supporter? What type of division comes between you and the people you care about? What policies are going into place because we can't all find common ground? This is not the time to sit down and take it easy. This is the time to get more involved than ever, to reach out to your fellow human and to ask them what's wrong. At the end of the day, we all have the same grievances. So why are we so far away from the middle? Where did all the bipartisan leadership go? Donald Trump ran a campaign of fear and division because we let him. We let him divide us. We let him take control of the political system. We let him instill fear into every one of his followers. We let him spew hatred and lies, and we let him win the White House. Don't let him take our democracy and replace it with a dictatorship, because that destruction will be here long after he's gone, and will have to be cleaned up for generations.